All right, hello. Sorry, I just forgot until a second ago that I actually need to share my screen. And so let's find the screen. Okay, cool. Oh, I need to share it. Okay, perfect. So welcome everybody. This is yet another Rust Gamedev Meetup. However, this one's gonna be a bit slower. We have Kevin here with Graphite, and I'm going to talk about some stuff that I'm working on. But that's about it for this month. I think a lot of people were mentioning that they have stuff going on for Easter, and so it's be relatively short on that side. One thing I'm thinking of though is that after we do like our presentations, I might just like do a working stream of me working through like the newsletter. I don't know if I'll like piggyback that on to this stream or just do it on a different one so that I can have it for later or whatever kind of stuff. I'm not sure. Yeah, but that being said, it's gonna be hopefully pretty chill. And with that being said, since I'll be working on the newsletter in a bit. Anybody checking this out in the near future, if you have anything you want to add to this this month's newsletter, then there's quite a lot to be able to work on. I do need to update it for the stuff that people are currently working on, but I think we'll have like a lot of sections that could be taken if you want to contribute. So, sorry, 1 second. Let me just pause my music. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, there we go. Okay, so a little bit about what I've been kind of playing around with. I've been playing with eGUI. eGUI is, I'm sure many people are familiar. It's pretty nifty now that I've started playing with it for like setting up UIs and stuff like that. And I've been kind of thinking, like, if I go to the eGUI demo, you could make like a game inside of here without any other engine pretty easily. In like a lot of ways, it's like a pretty nice interface. And so this got me thinking about like Zachtronics games. And so if you've ever seen games like Shenzhen.io, you got Opus Magnum, I think is that way of saying it. And then like TIS 100 and so on and so forth. And all of these are like very nice games that really make good use of a user interface to do quite a lot, I think. And And so maybe like my favorite example right now is Shenzhen.io. And so I've been kind of taking some inspiration from that. And so what I've kind of been, or like, I guess the premise of what I've been trying to do is I want to create something that allows people to more easily learn some of the systems ideas in systems languages. And so I think one of the things I've struggled with while learning, when I was like taking like the systems course at my university, when we'd go through and like learn a lot of the stuff about pointers and how memory works and a lot of this, a lot of it was all right. I didn't dive further into C, and so there's a lot that was missing for me. And so sort of what I wanted to do is say like, okay, well, what could I do to make a tool that is like a lot better? And as I'm building this out, I'm like, okay, well, is this just like a hex editor? Is this just stuff that already exists? But I'm in the same way that like AB Street has some pretty cool way of gamifying like their maps. I'm kind of like looking at what can I do to make it similar. And so this is like the very first prototype, and it's not accurate to any type of systems language. But the thing I wanted to show off was like, right now you can do stuff like int, float, double, and then it will take up a certain amount of space in this. Right now it's just bits on a screen, and then if you hover over it, it would show you like where in memory that that stuff is working in. And so the next level I want to do from here is kind of take this into a domain specific language, and so create some domain specific language that you'd use to code inside of here, and have enough so that you can do something like call a function, and then you can see, oh, okay, this is where that's going on like the function call stack, or this is where maybe if you have some like different parts of memory, this is where you can do some stuff there. And so then I've been thinking further, okay, well, like how could I gamify something like this? And okay, so with the sort of ideas of like, if you wanted to start pretty basic and work your way up, the first thing I'm thinking of doing is creating a language that's very like inspired by AOC int code. So yeah, Advent of Code had some challenges back in 2019 in which you would go through and have some instructions that are purely just numbers. So for example, this program, you'd look at like the first number and then say, okay, what opcode is this? Oh, it's the opcode 1, which means adds numbers together. So you take the number in the position 9 and then the number in the position 10 of like your array, and then add them together, and then put the answer into position 3. And then you'd read the next one. Okay, that's the next opcode, and then do stuff. And so I really like this type of thing for kind of making a very simple language that does not have a whole bunch of, well, it doesn't have any control flow. I think it's very linear control flow, maybe is the way to say it. And so starting with something like this and getting you to like say, okay, I'm moving something from this area down here over to this area up here, and what is it that we're moving? Oh, it's just gonna be a number. We're not thinking like any data types or anything. You're just always moving a number, and then maybe you're gonna add some numbers together, and so on and so forth. And so yeah, so I kind of been playing with this, toying around with it a little bit. I have had a lot of fun over the last few days learning there's a crate called Chomsky that Zester works on. So Zester is another another core developer of Valorant. So I know him quite well, and I've been like asking him a lot of stuff regarding Chomsky. But essentially, it's a and I don't know the lingo and stuff like that, but allows you to very easily parse stuff in like a very declarative way. I can like describe how my language should be parsed, and then it will do the work for that. And this works super well at like creating your own domain specific language. And so I think oftentimes in Rust, when we think DSL, we think, okay, you're doing it in macros. And I mean, I have not really explored that route, so maybe that's very viable. But using this to create just like several different languages that allow you to do stuff with memory has been pretty interesting. And now that being said, I've never made it past the part of like I can like do like a few things at once, and so there's still a lot to learn. But yeah, so a ton of fun with this project. It'd be kind of cool. So right now I do have like a public URL that you could go to, and that's just like whatever I push to main. I'm going to open source the repo in the future. I think I just wanted to get to a pretty good place before I can start doing stuff. But anyways, that's my initial ramble here about the kind of stuff I am playing around with. And so, as I mentioned, we do have Kevin here to talk to us about graphite. So we'll be back in just a minute with that.
I do not hear you. Somehow your voice has stopped working.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, now it's good.
Okay.
It was muffled for a second when you got back.
Okay, no worries. You're good.
Okie dokie. Are we ready?
Yep.
So this is... Alright, so this is the monthly update for Graphite. If you're just tuning in for the first time, very quick overview. Basically, Graphite is aiming to be a 2D graphics editor that covers the use cases of Photoshop and GIMP, as well as the use cases of Illustrator and Inkscape. And it combines that with a procedural, non-destructive approach. So sort of like Houdini or Nuke or Blender geometry nodes, or any kind of node-based shader editor, except more in the context of actual graphics creation rather than shaders or modeling. Here's a mock-up of the UI. So we're aiming to make something that's relatively traditional. You've got your tools on the left, you've got your tabs at the top, you've got your layer panel, you've got your properties panel. But then the not traditional part is that we are integrating a node graph with it. And you will notice that there's a bijection between the nodes here and the layers here. So we've designed specifically in a way that allows you to view either the normal, relatively similar to the usual layer tree, or you can view it in the form of a directed acyclic graph, because a tree and a graph are somewhat interchangeable. So with that quick overview out of the way, let's cover some progress from this past month. So first of all, we attended GDC, the Game Developers Conference, to talk about Graphite as an attendee to other attendees. Both myself as well as our community member Oliver, we were both there and had a good time talking to people about Graphite. Especially meeting some good artists and seeing what they're interested in. So that was fun. And we also have updated the website for Graphite, so I can show that off right now. So now we have some new artwork here. I went and created this over the past few days. Finally spent some real time actually using Graphite for real artwork. And we also have this that I showed earlier. And now we've got some updated text, we've got a new video. This is something I've shown in the past, but feel free to watch that on your own time. We've got some new icons. And we also have an updated features page, which includes some of this information, as well as a new roadmap. So if you're interested in seeing specifically where we are in the roadmap for Graphite, we've got all the content from the first year of development condensed into one bullet point, and then this past year of development has also been condensed into one bullet point. And now here is the remaining things we have to complete before we complete Alpha Milestone 1 and move on to Alpha Milestone 2. And then we'll also eventually get to Alpha Milestone 3, and then eventually Beta, and eventually 1.0 release, and then everything goes on beyond 1.0. So that is an update to the website. Feel free to check it out at graphite.rs. Then the past very big feature from the past month has been the vector nodes refactor /port /migration. Basically what this means is that we've ported all the shape data and the styling into the node graph, because previously it was its own layer type before we adopted the node graph system. But now if we actually click on these, you will see each of these vector shapes we have a path generator. So this is the node that stores your path data. So if you use the pen tool and you move things around, it will store your changes back into this node. And in the future, we'll be able to visualize those changes in the form of a spreadsheet where each row is its own node, and each column is either like the anchor or the handles and those different positions. We now also have another node which it feeds into, which is the transform, and this basically gives it the ability to be placed somewhere in the canvas. So in this case, we have it placed at 454, 413 in the canvas. And it's not rotated, but we could rotate it, for example. Or we could scale it. Then we pass it into the fill, and this is where we could set the fill. And right now we're using a linear, a gradient fill, and we're using a linear gradient from this color to this color. We could also just hit the invert button, for example, and swap it. Then we also have a stroke node, so the data feeds through the stroke node and it sets the stroke. And you can see that we have this stroke set. I could, for example, increase that to 20, and it would, of course, increase. And then finally we have it feed into the output node, and that's how it actually gets sent and rendered into the canvas. So for each of these different layers, we have all the different shapes. And for example, this one, here's one with a radial gradient. So we have almost solid color the entire way, except from 77 to 100%, we end up having this color turn a little bit brighter. So you can see it around the radial gradient going from the center to the outskirts. That's where it changes color. And yes, that was a very, very big refactor because it required essentially going through every single system that uses vector data, and now it stores it in more of a modular data form rather than being just a separate node type or a separate layer type that had nothing to do with the node graph. So now there's only one layer type left that we have to convert over and port to the node system, and that will be the text tool. So, hello. This is its own layer type, you can see, because it has its own icon, but everything else now has the layer icon, indicating that it's a layer part of the node graph. And essentially every layer is interchangeable, you just have something, and whatever that something is ends up going to an output node, and then that gets rendered into the layer. And we just have this text tool next that is going to be ported in the next month, and that means that we just have folders and layers. And then the final step after that is porting both folders and layers into a single node graph. So each layer is no longer a separate, well, layer in this layer panel. It is instead part of one node graph. And then folders also encapsulate layers, and they are also part of the same single node graph. So your entire document will be one node graph, and at that point, we will then have a new layer panel which represents the tree format of the node graph as shown in the mockup earlier. Shown in this mockup here. So that's how we will end up displaying them, and you'll still see them in the layer tree here, but it's going to look a little different. So that has been the major progress for the month, and additionally we've done some various bug fixes. We were aiming to polish things up a bit, so that was a major focus, well, a side focus besides the vector nodes for this past month. So with that said, feel free to check it out. You can go to editor.graphite.rs and play with it right now. If you join our Discord, you can also you can find this file here. Just go to the Art Showcase channel and you can download the Graphite file and then open it up in Graphite yourself and play with it. So go ahead and take a look at our Discord, grab that file, and open it up in editor.graphite.rs. And also we have some beginner-friendly issues on GitHub, so I'm just going to quickly show that. We do have, if you go to the Issues tab and then go to Approachable Mini Starter Tasks for new contributors, pick any of these ones from the bullet points here, and these should all be relatively approachable, and also feel free to send us a message, and we'd also be very happy to help out with telling you where to get started. And then there is also on this page here, how to contribute. We have an entire introduction guide for contributing, just sort of how to install the project, how to start understanding a little bit of the code, and how to debug things. So feel free to check that out and submit some pull requests for some of the different issues we have. So yeah, with that said, I'll see you next month.
All right, so very cool kind of seeing I think just seeing different art pieces that you create are pretty cool because it kind of gives a little bit of a view into how I guess how your mind sees being able to use Graphite at the current state, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so it definitely is a competent vector editor at this point, and now we're just going into the very interesting territory of making it also become a raster editor slowly, little piece by piece, picking out specific things like the AI image generation with stable diffusion. That's a very, because we can sort of just integrate an external technology, that's something where it's a low-hanging fruit, actually, to integrate that innovative technology. But things like the brush tool, which, by the way, we have very, very close to done now. I didn't show it off because it's not merged, but we do have a brush tool, which just has to be having a few small bug fixes added in the next couple of days and then merged.
Was this the brush tool that we were talking about like several meetups ago with like all the unique procedural ways of setting it up?
Yeah, so it's procedural. Basically, the way that it works is it records your mouse movement, and each of those points that are part of the mouse movement recording end up being rasterized into a brush. And if you change the color, or you change the radius, or you change any of the other properties, it will re-rasterize that brush, and you have a new layer containing the new data.
Okay, interesting. So I guess like the separation between that and other manners is that you with something like Illustrator, you do brushes on a layer, but it wouldn't necessarily like it would just draw that in. It wouldn't store the mouse information for later.
Yeah, exactly. Because it normally in another editor, in traditional raster editors, it would store it by. It would store the basically the pixels that you filled as soon as you draw them. So here I can go ahead and draw something, and you'll see temporarily we're going to see just a stroke like that, but then it gets rasterized like this as soon as you let go. That's for performance reasons. At the moment, we don't have the ability to rasterize it in real time because we don't have GPU execution, so everything is running on the CPU. But now I can also turn up the hardness, for example, and we end up with this. So it's a little splotchy. That's just because the mouse movement in between frames, and I was moving my mouse quickly. But we can definitely do some improvements going forward, which will resample points in between and that kind of thing. And of course, we can change the color, increase the size after the fact. So it renders it at a higher size, and of course we can turn down the opacity. The opacity, and that specifically is the opacity of each individual stroke, so that they don't end up clumping together. Like in this case, they kind of clump together, and you're mostly seeing the same color in the inner portion, and then around the outer portion, you're seeing the fall off. So yeah, that is the brush tool.
Okay, awesome.
That will be merged very soon.
One question from chat here. Is it possible to have multiple layers with the same node graph, like prefabs?
Layers with the same node graph. That will be part of when we have replaced all the separate layers with one major node graph, or one single node graph that defines the document, and each individual layer will then be part of the same node graph. But we can't do that at the moment because right now each node graph a layer is defined as being a node graph, and we need to move towards a document as being defined as a single node graph with layers inside.
So maybe I guess like the way I would think about it is like if you have this is very much like how Godot works, where you have scenes that you can like duplicate very easily, and then wherever you're using them, you can just add like another reference to that same scene, and then you change that scene, you're good to go. And like it just like applies across everywhere that references it. And so in the same way, like if you have like some upper level node, could I reference that from multiple different places in the node graph and have sort of just like an instance of it?
In the future, you should be able to, but again, at the moment, every layer is defined as containing its own node graph. So of course you can duplicate a layer, but then any changes you make to the one are not going to propagate to the other.
And just out of curiosity, is that pattern used very often at all? Like, or like where you would want to have multiple things reference the same layer?
I don't know.
Yeah, I imagine like potentially adjustment layers, or I'm thinking maybe like in games, like what type of stuff would you have in a layer, or I guess in a node graph that you would just want to have all over the place? And
I think once you get into procedural things, which will be upcoming, you have the ability, for example, to take a layer, the content from a layer, and stamp it in a bunch of places. So you might say, replicate this shape 100 times across, scattered across your artwork, or scattered across the interior of a shape, or something like that. But that's all the procedural content that, of course, will be coming relatively soon, but not quite yet.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, okay, and so like the follow up is about that as well, so that you can edit the graph and the changes apply to all layers. Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity as well, so with GDC, so you mentioned that like some people were able to, like, you're like chatting with some people about graphite and stuff like that.
Mhm.
What I'm quite curious about is, I mean, I viewed this project very much from the Rust perspective. I'm like, oh yeah, there's like a lot of cool stuff in the stack. It's cool seeing the progress and everything. But what do artists feel about it? Like, what are some like what's some feedback that you've gotten from people who'd use it?
Yeah, they seem to be pretty interested in the concept of having a free open source editor. Of course, I wasn't talking to artists specifically about the concept of it being Rust based, because that's probably a language they may have never even heard of. But basically, they were interested in the idea of it being node based, and they seem to have liked the UI. So that is validating that people seem to see the potential, even though, of course, it was always relatively short conversations without being able to always go into as much depth as the rabbit hole goes for the graphite project.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Um, I I don't know too much about GDC this year. Like I guess you went as just like an attendee, right?
Yeah, to the expo only.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Was there anything else there that you saw that was like pretty nifty? Any like interesting things?
There was definitely the very beginnings of the AI revolution showing up.
Yeah.
You could see a number of companies that were showing little mock-ups. I think they were probably just mock-ups of using prompts to type out, saying like, fill this terrain with grass, and then add houses, and then add
Mhm.
vehicles and things like that. They were probably mock-ups though, because this is just the first few months since large language models have become accessible in an API form.
Mhm.
But I'm fairly sure that next year that will be the entire rage of the show.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
just seeing the very previews of it, and I'm glad in our case we're actually, at least with the generative AI, pretty early on the curve and taking advantage of that while it's still fresh.
Yeah, well, and especially just like in the way that it's being used in graphite. Like, I mean, the ability to generate images is not very novel. The ability to kind of like use it as a tool to smooth over images and like make small changes. And I mean, as I was playing with it, there was just like I felt like there was a ton of potential for stuff that I hadn't done before. And so,
Yeah,
um,
just like the ability to paint with a brush was not novel, but the ability to use a digital brush
yeah,
as part of a tool, a larger tool that does digital art, was of course quite novel when digital photo editing became a thing.
yeah, exactly. All right. Yeah. Well, it's great seeing the graphite updates as always. So,
Mm-hmm.
thank you very much,
Yeah,
Keaton.
thank you. See you next month.
Cheers. All right. So, as I mentioned, that was the all the speakers that we have for this month. And so, what I'm thinking I'll probably do is I'll end off this stream just so it is like a condensed video on YouTube, and then I'll quickly create another one. I'll post a link in the Rust Gamedev Discord for anybody who wants to watch along. Though it's very much gonna be like just a work session of me working on the newsletter, and so it'll also be on YouTube later. I think like the main thing that I want to do about it, I've been talking to people recently about how like the transparency of working on like the newsletter and some like the stuff that's done behind the scenes in the Rust Game Dev working group. It's not that it's necessarily like we intend on it being hidden. It's just that by nature of like, oh, I do the exact same thing every month, and so I know what I'm doing, kind of thing, makes it less visible because I don't often reach out for stuff. And so, yeah, with that being said, thanks for stopping by for this month's game development meetup, and we'll be back next month. Hopefully I can grab some more people. I think it'd be really cool to have like a larger presentation, or I guess like a larger group of people next month, and so I'll start reaching out to people early, but we will see you then.